welcome to Let's Grab a Cup podcast. My name is Adam Sturgeon, I'm your host. Today I'll be talking to my friend PJ. His full name is Patrick Joseph Lyon. That's Lyon, Lyon, not like the animal, but he is kind of like a lion over here.
Yeah.
So PJ has 22 years of police experience with a municipal department in Southern California. He started his career 22 years ago. He was an FTO. He spent about a total of about 8 years on patrol. He went into the community policing through the gang field team and worked his way to a filing officer for the gang team. And going back to patrol after that, he then promoted to sergeant a year ago, and now he's a sergeant in the field, right?
Yep.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on. So, Patrick Joseph.
Yeah.
First question. When did PJ start? Was that like a high school thing or younger?
It was younger. It was rough actually because it started with, I didn't want to be Patrick because it was too formal. It was way too formal. And then it got into peanut butter and jelly. And then, and it just, the nickname started to go, stuff like that. But I thought Patrick was a lot formal, so I was like, let's narrow that down. I didn't like Pat. I didn't like Patrick. None of that. So I went with PJ, and it's stuck ever since. My mom calls me PJ.
That's funny. So we talked about this. My middle name is Patrick.
Yeah.
And I couldn't stand it growing up, like Patrick. I don't know why. There's nothing wrong with the name, but I felt like it was me.
It's way too formal. Way too formal.
No offense to all the Patricks out there.
Yeah.
So.
And Patricia's.
That's right. So PJ, I know you came on, and after hearing the podcast, we talked about it a little bit. You were interested in coming on and kind of telling your story. Let's start, kind of where you grew up and how you got to the point of becoming a police officer.
Yeah, so I grew up locally. I grew up in Cerritos, went to Artesia High School, and then played football. And my junior year, I was actually getting recruited really, really big by colleges. And then my junior year, I tore my ACL. So I was like, oh, back then it was like a major surgery where they had to open you up. So the colleges shied away from me, so I ended up going to Cerritos College. And I took my first criminal justice class there. It was one of those things where you're a football player, and they're like, hey, this is the easy A. But then I took it, and I really liked it. I thought it was something I would be interested in. So I got a AS degree in administration of justice from Cerritos College.
Okay.
And then I transferred, went to Long Beach State, joined their criminal justice program, got all the way to my senior year, 20 credits shy of getting a bachelor's, and then decided to apply for our police department.
What year was that?
That was in 99.
Wow. And did you go back and finish?
I didn't.
20 credits.
Yeah.
You have to have those credits by now with all the training.
With all the training we do, but I don't know how to count it. Maybe I should look into that.
I'm sure there's a way that they can count it.
Yeah.
I feel like we can get those credits back.
Yeah. Especially if it's means more pay, right?
I mean, why not?
Yeah, exactly.
Is it a bachelor's degree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Cerritos College, Artesia High School, you played football.
Yeah.
You tore your ACL when you were how old?
Junior. What's ironic about it is I tore my ACL my junior year of high school, and my daughter tore her ACL and MCL her junior year of high school.
What?
Yeah, so it was kind of like one of those things where I went through it, and now I could tell her, hey, I did the same thing, and look at me, I'm okay.
So I've never torn an ACL, but I know like a lot of athletes do. So what does that entail? So
basically, I was a lineman. I was big, just like I am now. I was actually 20 pounds heavier than I am now when I played high school football. And I was blocking somebody, and a defensive lineman rolled up on my knee, and I just tore it. I just heard a pop. And that's why when my daughter hurt her knee, I knew exactly what it was, because I heard the same pop that happened to me.
So are you done after that? Like when you tore your ACL?
Yeah,
done?
So back then, the surgery was major. You wouldn't come back from it, so I didn't get the surgery. I elected not to and just kind of rehab the areas around it. And then I was actually okay. I played football at Cerritos College, actually. Oh. I just wasn't as good. I think it was one of those things where I was scared to get hurt after being hurt.
Yeah.
And I just kind of pussed out after that and didn't want to do it. So
pull the punches.
Yeah. I was like, never mind. I'd rather do this criminal justice thing. And I was kind of in the security business already because I worked for a company called Staff Pro, and I was a bouncer in Hollywood as well.
I kind of forgot you did the Staff Pro. I don't know why. I know you do it, but I forgot.
Yeah. So I started off as a man. I was actually making pretty good money. I was a manager for Staff Pro. I ran Irvine Meadows back in the old days. Yeah. My best friend, Tushawn and Victor, we all joined Staff Pro together. Tushawn's now the vice president of the company. So, but yeah, we ran Irvine Meadows, the pond, the old Forum when the Lakers played there. worked that. And then I was a bouncer at the Whiskey A Go Go down in
Oh, really?
yeah, in Hollywood, and then also the Roxy and the Troubadour. So that's kind of where I learned how to fight and stuff like that and protect myself.
You're bouncing people out.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. So that's what kind of got me into doing the criminal justice thing, and then it went from there. I mean, went to the academy, met my now ex-wife through Staffro, and then we had a baby in 2001. That was my first daughter, Ileana, and I'm sure we'll dive into her. Kind of right off the bat, and it was one of those things, I don't know, and that's why I see young officers today, they kind of jump into relationships so quick. They end up with like a girlfriend, and then they get this long career, and they think, oh, this is it, I have to like set everything up from here. And I did that, and it was a mistake. I got married too soon, had a kid too soon, did all that stuff just because I thought, oh, now I'm a police officer, I'm making more money, I have a retirement,
Right.
It's time to do that, even though I was with the wrong person. So I see that all the time now.
It's very similar that you say that because I was very young in my relationship. Same thing. Got in the police department, met my wife, and got married. And obviously, we've had our ups and downs.
Mhm.
And it was probably because we didn't know who we were. We were too young to really know how to communicate and build that relationship. And a lot of guys, I think I'm the same way. Like, tell these young guys, like, hey, I'm not saying that she's not the one, but I'm like, hey, take some time. Like,
Yes.
figure out what you're doing before you just jump into this stuff.
And then I see these young officers that are like taking trips all over, and I mean, that's what I should have done. I'm like so envious of them. I'm like, oh man, these boys they're traveling, they're going to Europe, they're traveling the world. I'm like, it's tough if I get out of Southern California, So, yeah, but definitely, when we had our daughter, our first daughter, it started off, and then, we took her home, and about a week into having her at home, we noticed little spots on her skin, right? And we're like, oh, that's kind of odd. And then she was really a jaundice is, like she was yellow.
Right.
Yeah, so we were like, oh, that's kind of odd too. And then about a week later, she turned blue, and we had to take her to the hospital. It was a week into having taken our baby home. So we take her to the hospital. She's in the hospital for 2 weeks. They're running all kinds of tests on her, and they come back to us and they tell her, okay, we're going to show you these pictures, and they show us a picture of a normal brain, and it's kind of like a CT scan. And I see it, it's like you can see the brain is gray, and then they show my daughter's brain, and there's white spots all over it. And they tell us she has what's called tuberous sclerosis, and basically she has hundreds of tumors in her brain.
Jesus.
She has some in her brain, she has, I think one in her lung, that's why she turned blue. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'm thinking all of a sudden cancer, right? And they're called benign tumors, which means they're not cancerous, they're just there. My first reaction was, well, let's get them out of her.
Right.
And they told us, well, that would be too much damage. And the way they explained it to me was, you have brain currents that electricity that goes through your brain, and these tumors cause disruptions in the electricity, and that causes her to have seizures. So it's called tuberous sclerosis, is what she had. And it's a seizure disorder. So at the beginning, she was having 200 to 300 seizures a day, which was insanely difficult for us. Having a small baby, the guilt that we had, my ex-wife, I already knew about her depression problems before I married her, but she all of a sudden went into this like deep depression. She blamed herself, said that she had these issues maybe while she thought maybe she did something wrong during the pregnancy that caused this. You go through all those type of things. So we had to deal with that, and luckily we saw a genealogist, which basically said, hey, no, it's not because of that. It's a spontaneous mutation of the genes that caused it. It wasn't anything that you did wrong. So she had that, and it was bad at the beginning. I remember there was this time where the doctor was like, hey, she's got it. They told her she wasn't going to live into her 20s, that she would probably live into her teens or late teens at the best, which ends up being true, and we'll talk about that.
Right.
But she ends up, about 2 months later, she ends up a little bit later, she ends up sitting up, and she ends up having what's called drop seizures, where she has to wear a helmet, because she'd basically be in the sit-up position, and then she just boom dropped down and banged her head off of the ground. And we're like, oh my god.
Okay, how old is she at this point?
Whenever she could start sitting up, I would say almost maybe like a year, almost somewhere around there.
So Brand, like, so let me see, I'm trying to get time here. It's like 2 weeks. She goes to the hospital, and then how old is she when she's having like 200 to 300 seizures a day?
The whole time.
This whole time.
The whole time. She's having about 200 to 300 seizures until she's about 2 years old. When she's 2 years old, the doctors, and thank God we all have good insurance being police officers. She had I think it was like $100,000 surgery.
Jeez. That
was called a vagus nerve stimulator. So what that is it's like a little goes just underneath your skin, and it has a little battery inside of it, and 2 wires come around, and it wraps around your vagus nerve, and it gives every 5 seconds it gives an electrical shock, which helps out with those disruptions I was talking about. So there's the electrical flow in the brain,
right.
And then that gives a shock, and it replaces the emptiness that's happening when it's getting disrupted by the tumors.
So does that stop the seizure?
It didn't stop them, but it got her to about 20 a day. So we went from, it was like a miracle. It went from 200 a day to like 20 a day. But 20 a day is still a lot of seizures.
Yeah, I think my daughter, she had 1 seizure, and we were freaked out. So I can imagine that 200, let alone 20 a day. And then she was a baby, so I don't know, what is the seizure? I don't know if it's the same, so what does the seizure look like?
And that's the other thing, she had every seizure you could possibly imagine, because she has so many in her brain. It depends on which part of the brain it is, the kind of seizure you had. She had focal seizures, she had what's called drop seizures, she had grand mal seizures. Those are the ones where they kind of tighten their whole body, and they do kind of like a long, like their whole body tightens up, and they just do this long, like, pause and do like a seizure. And then she has the full-on seizures that you normally see people have, where they're hopping around the ground and stuff like that. So she had all different kinds of seizures.
How long do they last?
And that's the other thing. It depended on what part of the brain it was affecting. And we knew that the ones where she turns blue had to do with the tumor that she had in her lung. She had one in her lung. And that was the one that they were most concerned with from the beginning, was the one in her lung, because that one was so big.
Did they, I don't know any of this part, so did they do surgery on her lungs at all? Or
No,
not
no.
They
Everything they told us about surgery was if they removed any part of the tumors, that it was removing part of the brain, or it was removing part of the lung, and that would do more damage in the long run. So the best way that they treated it was to treat the symptoms, and that meant seizure medication. Which, if you know anybody the cities that we work in, you stop transients or homeless people, they're taking all kinds of medication. I was starting to see stopping transients. My daughter was taking the same medication. We're talking phenobarbital at like 2-3 years old.
Jeez.
Phenobarbital, heavy seizure medications. And ultimately, when she got into like her 10s and 12s, she ended up showing the same behavioral problems that homeless people have. She was bipolar. She had ups and downs. It got to the point where she's nonverbal. First of all, it makes her extremely behind. So my daughter was like in her teens. She probably had the mental capability of like a 2-year-old, without nonverbal the whole time.
So then, does that mean that she has a caretaker, or how does that work? Or
no, that's the other thing is my ex-wife and I ended up getting divorced about 5 years into it. I had about 5 years on. We got a divorce. We kind of came up with a pact between the two of us, where she was going to devote her life to my sick daughter. And I know this is gonna sound weird, but she lived with me. My ex-wife lived with me. I paid child support and everything, and she took care of my disabled daughter. And I went along and said, hey, financially, I'm gonna be here to support you and my other daughters, and that was my job. Now that I look back at it, I would say that was a mistake, because I almost turned my back to my own daughter in a way, because I wasn't part of taking care of her as much as I could have been. I would say that I put a lot of effort into work, and that's what made me do all these things that you talked about when we went into the intro. I think I told you before, it was one of those things where I'd rather be at work and I'd rather be taking bad guys to jail and I'd rather take the overtime. I'd rather, um, I focused everything at work. I would ignore phone calls that came to me, even though my daughter was sick. And I turned my back. Of course, I'd be there if she went to the hospital, things like that. But all that pressure went on to my now ex-wife, and she took care of all that. And then my job was to take care of my other daughter, my healthy daughter, which she was born in 2004. So I kind of like shifted and took care of her, and took care of work, and kind of almost turned my back on my disabled daughter. And that was tough for me. Took me a while to feel guilty about it. I still feel guilty about it to this day. And that's kind of, I see these other officers, they go through things and they're young officers. And it makes me think like, this job is a job, like take care of your family first, because I missed that part of it. And I miss doing that part with my daughter.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like feeling like, and I can see you getting choked up. And,
No, yeah, it happens.
No, I know, and
Yeah.
it's a tough. So you have a lot of stuff going on at this time in your life. You have a brand new daughter. She has all these medical issues, and you're trying to figure out who's going to take care of her. Clearly, there's something going on with you and your ex-wife, or
Yeah.
causing a divorce, and now you're trying to figure out what to do. So I can see like the stress probably like, just building up.
Yeah, definitely.
So I'm like going back to your daughter when she was now, what you say 5 years? So you're saying that she was only like 5 years old when you guys got divorced?
She was about 5 years old.
And the seizures at this point are about 20 a day still?
They're down to about 20 a day.
And so are these like sporadic, just randomly throughout the day?
Yeah, throughout the day. A lot in the morning when you first wake up, because your brain's kind of stimulated at that point.
Right.
And then again at night before she went to bed.
And you said she's nonverbal, so she doesn't, how does she communicate? Or how do you, I guess how do you
she had like, we used to joke that she had her own language kind of. She would like mumble certain things and then oh, she's hungry or she wants this, she wants that. So she could say SpongeBob and she could say mom and dad. That was about it.
Really?
And Cece for her sister. So.
And her sister's younger, like a few years younger?
Yeah, a few years younger, yeah.
How did that work with the younger daughter? Like, did she take any like try to take responsibility roles, or was she in that?
She did. My younger daughter's great, by the way. She's a wonderful, wonderful sister to her. There was one time where this is a crazy moment. We had a pool at our old house, and I was in the kitchen, and my daughters were out in the backyard. My daughter that's disabled, she didn't know how to swim. She was always hung out like in the little kiddie pool part. She never went to the deep end. But she was playing and she ended up having a seizure and she fell into the deep end. And I didn't really see it. All I heard was my other daughter dive into the pool, right? And my daughter and I run outside and my daughter jumps into the pool and pulls my other daughter out of the pool. She was probably 12 at the time, and I was like, that was amazing.
That's crazy.
Yeah, saved her life basically, and I was like, to this day, I was like, that's my other daughter. That's just how Kayla is. She's very caring girl, and after that moment, I was like, okay, she's gonna be special, So, and she's a special girl.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I like to see that sparkle. Like
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I know I have 2 girls myself, so like definitely I understand that feeling of
Oh,
the
yeah.
connection to your kids.
Yeah, definitely.
So, all right. So you talked about diving into work, and yeah, you like you said before, like you have this, really like pretty good history at work.
Mm-hmm.
I would say like you're like a hard worker. You're well known around the department.
Mm-hmm.
People definitely respect you for the job that you do every day, and that's because, like you said, you dove into work,
Mm-hmm.
really, like what you said. So how did it go? Like you're talking about like your career. Like how did you navigate the career while also doing this with your ex-wife and your daughter?
Yeah, it's almost like a black and white situation where you, and I guess it seems to where like everyone that does well at things, they always have this bad side or this other thing going on. You look at like Michael Jackson, right? He did all these great things, and then he had this other part of him that he was messing with little kids and stuff like that. Or like Britney Spears, you see her, right? She had this great career, but then she had this other thing with drugs. It was one of these things where I felt that it was a chance for me to be someone else. I was having these issues at home with my daughter, and I didn't have any of that at work. You know, I fortunately did these things throughout my career, and I didn't have any of those bumps at work at all. And that's odd to say because throughout my 22 years, you would think that I would get denied for stuff and have all these problems in the road, and I didn't have any of those problems at work. And I think it was because I separated them a lot, and if I had to tell anybody in, I think that was the wrong way of doing it, to be honest. I think that I should have probably talked to a lot of the guys at work about it. There's not a lot of people at work that know my story. A couple of my classmates might know about it, but yeah, if I would have had more people to talk to, it wasn't until the end when my friends started to say that, hey man, you need to like take care of your home life a little bit. And people, my friends started to step in, and some of my coworkers, some dispatchers too, they talked to me a little bit and they were like, hey, you should probably take care of home a little bit. And I was like, you're probably right. And that's what kind of turned it around for me personally. So.
And when was this?
This was, I would say it was one of the driving factors of me leaving when I came back, when I left the gang unit and went back to patrol. It was right around that time. I was a lot more happier to be back from patrol.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I spent a lot more time with the family then. But even more so when my daughter passed away, that was a rough time. So basically one night, she was about 17 years old, so this was, when was this, about 4 years ago? Somewhere in there? No, not that long ago. I get called by my ex-wife. She was still living with me at that time.
How many years is this? Was she living with you?
17 years, somewhere around there, 16 years.
Wow.
Yeah. I went through living with my ex-wife that I never get along with for 16 years, so she could take care of my sick daughter. So she comes to me and she's like, Leanna's not breathing. And I come in and I see my daughter and she's not breathing. You know, it makes you think when you go to work, you see people not breathing all the time. You go if they're either dead right there or they're shot or they're hurt.
Right.
And we're supposed to render aid to them, or we do render aid to them to the best of our ability. But when you're sitting there and you're seeing your own daughter, you're like, oh crap, that's my daughter right there. I jumped into police mode. I was like, call 911. Almost like hey, you call 911. I told my ex-wife, call 911. I looked down, I checked her ABCs. She wasn't breathing. She didn't have a pulse. So I started CPR. And the only thing I could think was two things. Was number one, they freaking changed the freaking compressions to freaking breaths every single time I go to AFTC. So I have no idea how many I'm supposed to be doing. And two, this is my daughter. Am I pressing too hard? Am I going to break her ribs?
Oh, yeah.
The entire time. So I'm giving CPR. I end up actually getting a pulse on her, probably 3 minutes into it. Fire shows up. They're like, hey, you did a great job. You got her, blah, blah, blah. Took her to the hospital. She spent maybe 2 weeks in the hospital and never gained consciousness again. And we ended up pulling blood on her. And then she ended up passing away.
And she was how old?
She was 17 at the time, yeah. And that was tough, and I think I told you about it before. It's not to say it was a burden on my life, but everything that we had gone through all the way up to that point, she was in tremendous pain that entire time. And it was almost one of those things where what made me get over it was she didn't have to feel that pain. So that was the best. That was what helped me get through it. It's like, she's in a better place. She's no longer in pain, and she's no longer suffering, no longer having 20 seizures a day. She's no longer having to take medication. She doesn't have to do any of that anymore.
Yeah.
So that was the part that helped me get through it. Otherwise, I was a mess.
Yeah.
I was a mess at the beginning until I finally figured that part out. It took me a while to figure that out, too, about a year to figure that part out.
I think it's a different mindset. You can't, I think we talk about that a lot with our parents or grandparents when they get older and they're having a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, they're not in pain anymore, and you can kind of and they're older and the older generation, you kind of accept it because it's the circle of life kind of thing. But you're never supposed to
bury your child. No,
and,
at all.
So to wrap your head around that, I mean, I don't even know if I could wrap my head around that. There's only certain people that are in your shoes that had to do
Yeah.
that, and I don't even know what I would be thinking, how long that would take.
Yeah.
It was only 4 years ago.
Yeah, and this is the part where we talked about like our department that we work for. I will say that I had a positive. I know that a lot of people we talk about how the departments are dealing with stressful situations. Our department has had these type of situations where officers have committed suicide, things like that.
Right.
But I had a positive experience from our department. The Police Officers Association that we deal with paid for my daughter's funeral through the Widows and Orphans Fund. The entire command staff came to my daughter's funeral, and they each came up to me personally and had their condolences for me. So once again, I don't know if that's the relationships that I built throughout my career, the respect that I built throughout my career, but all the chiefs came and they were positive at that point. Now, do I think that things could have been done on our department before that? I think that I had to be willing to reach out for those, and I wasn't.
Right.
But there was nothing before that with my daughter's sickness before that I felt that I was comfortable enough, or our department offered enough for me to be part of.
Right.
They helped afterwards 110%, and I appreciate them for that. But the steps getting up to that point, I kind of had to do it on my own.
So I have a couple of things. So the first one is like that's really amazing that not only the department but the association stepped up and really did a job.
Yeah.
And I know you wanted to give them like kudos for that because I know you really appreciated that. Do you feel, you kind of mentioned it, do you feel that would have been different if you didn't have that level of respect for all the stuff you had already done because for the department, like because you are very well respected on a department, so it's not something that, so if you say your name to anybody on the department, they know who you are.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like it's like, oh, who's that person? So do you feel like that had something to do with it, the relationships you said you built with
I hope that's not the point. You know, part of me feels like that might have been part of it because when the command staff came up to me, I knew them all, right, and they all knew me. So I'm hoping that's not. Just in my case, that's what just happened to be. So, but I think that we're making the strides towards that. But I just don't know if there's got to be, both sides have to get into it. Like I'm sure that there was programs for me to go through during the process, but like I wasn't willing to do any of that. We're police officers, right? We're like, we got this bravado where, do I really need to talk to somebody about that? Do I really need to sit down and have a cup with Adam and talk about it? You know, I wish I would have had that. It would have helped me through the process, but I didn't have any of that. I had to figure it out on my own.
So that would be the second part of my question. So you said like obviously we have to do more leg work if you want, or at least back before, you have to do a lot more leg work to find the resources.
Yeah.
I know that they put out a lot of resources these days as far as like getting counseling. And I know a lot of departments have peer support, and I know ours is trying to revamp that. But as far as like what can we offer people where we put it out there, and you said you kind of had to like step up on your own.
Yeah.
So is there anything you can think of that, I mean, I'm the same way. I mean, at least I was the same way where I wouldn't, honestly, I didn't ask anyone for help. You know, if I was feeling like, you know, like crap one day, I would never ask somebody for help. Some people would ask, how are you doing? But I was not seeking it out.
Yeah.
So is there something else that you think that there could be specifically? Because we're still trying to figure this out.
I think that making those personal relationships for us, for our peers, number one, and then people that work for us and around us, is not just, you know, being so, we're coming to work, we're going to do our job, blah, blah, blah. It's actually, hey, what are you doing right now? Let's go over here, let's have a chat. And it's nothing bad or anything. It's like, how's the life? How's the wife? How the kids? Yeah. And that could be that one opportunity where you reached out to that person and they're able to tell you exactly what's going on. Yeah. You know, my kids doing great. They're playing softball. They're playing baseball, and you could get to know them. Hey, maybe I could love to go out and catch a game, things like that. There wasn't a lot of that. I don't know if it was because, I mean, it was a lot of, hey, let's go have a beer, let's go have a drink. And when we did that, it was just worried about having a cocktail and this and that. We were talking about feelings. We weren't talking about family and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I know that's something I've been trying to like push as far as like the idea of like taking time for each other. And even like I knew about your daughter passing, but I didn't know all of this background until we actually sat down and like talked one day and like actually got into it. So I think that like going over it with somebody, it doesn't have to be like a big ordeal, but just like you said, have some time to talk about it. And I don't know, I feel like it's, even if it's not therapy, I feel it's therapeutic just even talking about different things, even like because you hear what's in your head and like, yeah, this is where I could have done something better. Maybe I can teach somebody something that they can learn from what I went through.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. And when I was at FTO the second time through the FTO program, I kind of took that approach with my trainees. I got pretty close to a lot of them, like mentally and just on a relationship pattern as far as work is concerned. I dove into their life. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Are you married? I used to never do that when I was first at FTO. I didn't know that stuff. But then it was like, what's going on at home? You have kids, you know? And then I got to know them a little bit better.
Right.
And it helped them because I noticed that when they went through the stresses of it, if they had something else going on at home, a lot of it had to do with that too.
Oh yeah, I think 99% of what we deal with at home is going to be the stressor that we're pulling into work.
Oh, definitely, 100%. And it makes me think about, because I worked with a lot of the officers that hurt themselves in our department that ended up passing away, and it makes me think I knew all of them. I worked with hand in hand with Goop, hand in hand with Chris, hand in hand with Sarge. You know, like that was my team. You know, and I feel like I saw them, we talked to them, they always had a smile on their face, but did I really talk to them? It was just like, hey, what's up? How you doing? It wasn't really like get down and have a really conversation with them. And you feel a little guilty about that. One of the things that made me come onto your show was that when you first had talked about how when something bad happens, we shoot that text message of condolences, like, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Like that's when it made me think about how many times people told me that when my daughter passed away. But am I really going to reach out to those people? Probably not. It's going to take the ones that come over to my house and force me to go out and drag my ass out of bed where I've been sleeping there for 2 days. Or it took my friends to come up to me and be like, no, you're going with us right now. We're going to go do this. We're going to go do that. You're going to take your mind off of it, this and that. Versus just shooting the text message of, hey, are you okay? That made, and you talked about it, and it made me think about how much we do that. We shoot that text message and it makes us feel better. Like, hey, I reached out to him. I'm okay. Right. No harm, right? But did we really do enough? You know, and I think that if we see somebody struggling or somebody showing signs of that, I think that we should reach out to them, because then you never know, it's gonna be too late at that point, you know. Because there was parts where my daughter passed away where I think I told you this before. I seriously was in a bad place. I mean, I was drinking. I was going out. That's how I dealt with it. I went out and with my friends and partied it up and went bad. Went or gambled. I gambled a lot. I did a lot of these bad things. And it was finally my friends that went to me and was like, hey, you need to like tone it down a little bit. You need to think about yourself. And I think a lot of that has to do with me meeting my fiance, and she is the light.
When you met your fiance?
My fiance now. I have a fiance now, and she's great. And she's somebody that I could. We just it was like 2 weeks ago. We have a fire pit in the backyard, and we usually come home, we watch TV, watch our shows together, this and that. But no, she was like, hey, grab a bottle of wine, let's go out by the fire. And we just sat there and talked. And that was probably one of the greatest times we've had as a couple. To just sit in front of a fire with some wine, and we talked for hours, cried a little bit. We just spilled each other's guts. To have that type of relationship where you have a best friend that you can talk to means a lot. You know, whoever that is, if it's your fiance, if it actually is your best friend. But it was cool to have that, and I'm glad I've had her for that. So
when did you meet her?
I met her about 3 years ago. It was like about a year after my daughter passed away, and that's why I told you she made it a lot easier for that whole process to go through. So she has a huge part of that, and her family's great. So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, I know, like the difference of just being able to say, hey, we're not going to just sit in front of the TV. We're actually going to spend time talking and really diving into stuff, and that's good. I'm glad you're able to find that.
Yeah, and that was a big part of it. That was definitely a big part of it.
So you have 2 daughters.
Yes.
Two?
Two, yeah. I have my daughter now. She is a senior in high school. That's another thing. Diving into those, you know, she's gonna go off to college. She's gonna play softball. She's got a little bit of a chance to play Division I softball at a really good private school. So
That's cool.
I'm proud of her about that. And it was tough for her, man, to lose your sister. Man, that was the part that kind of, because I dealt with my daughter and her softball for the longest time, but seeing her have to deal with burying her own sister, you know, was tough, and I worried a lot about her, but she kind of did what I did. She put all of her effort into softball, where I kind of put all my effort into work,
Right.
and she got through it, you know. So I'm proud of her for that. I'm not sure if it was the best thing for her to do. I supported her 110% throughout the whole thing. It was probably a little rough on her at times, but I've learned to kind of back off of that. It was interesting. We had this discussion the other day. My daughter has never brought home like a boy, girl, or anything like somebody like relationship, like brought somebody to the house. She's 17 years old, but never brought anybody. So I was talking to my fiance about it, and she's like, you know, like maybe she's scared, like to bring your big guy, your police officer, this or that, like, and and society, you know, has taught us, you know, she's probably scared to bring somebody home, boy or girl or whatever, and she probably doesn't even know that you're okay with either one of those, right? And I was like, I've never had that discussion with her, talk with her, so I actually had that talk with her.
Oh, did you?
Oh, totally. I said, hey, look, babe, I accept anything. It's 2022, and I accept anyone that you bring over. As long as they're happy and they make you happy,
Right.
that's all I care about. Don't ever be scared to bring somebody home. So I felt like this huge elephant was off my back having that discussion with her, but I was like, oh, okay. Like,
Do you feel like she was able to, you don't have to say what she said, but do you feel like she was able to like open up with you?
yeah, she was like, because I told her, you're going off to college, and you're gonna be living, you know, by yourself, and she was like, okay, yeah. And that's kind of her response to everything. So I was like, I don't know if she really understood or not, but either way, I love you. It's weird to have that conversation with your teenage daughter. You know?
I think it's important. I think we have to, with our children at least, like in people in general, but tell them like it's okay to come to me with anything. And I try. My kids are little, so I mean, I try to tell them now, like, hey, I want you to. My biggest thing I tell my wife is like, hey, I want them to be able to talk to me about anything, even if it's bad, because there was a time for me where I was like, I didn't feel like I had that connection with my parents when like I could talk to them anymore. And I think that's important that no matter what's going on, that they can come talk to you, right? Like I don't want to ever lose that relationship with them. So having that conversation with your daughter, I think it's really good.
I think it's almost one of those things like my dad was alcoholic and he left early on in my life. So my mom raised me my whole life. And I don't know if I can have that conversation with my mom because you had a certain amount of respect for your parents and you don't want to like lose that. You don't want them to like lose respect for you by having an open conversation with them. So that was kind of like, that's what I feared when I talked to my daughter. I was like, I don't want her to think that she can't come to me. And I know I could be intimidating at times, but with her, I didn't want that. I didn't want her to think that at all. That was my fear.
Do you feel like you're intimidating and at work too? Do you think people are intimidated by you?
I think so. I think a lot. I mean, that's gotten me out of a lot of situations too. You know, there's been situations where I mean, at work where you're like, oh yeah, that guy Harry, you know, but I think it's because of my size and stuff like that, and they were like, oh okay, yeah, I don't want to.
Well, yeah, it's different if you show up than where I show up. Yeah. And be like, I don't want to mess with this guy.
Yeah, and that's happened, and that's gotten me out of a few situations, but definitely. Yeah.
So what's next? Like so you're a sergeant now, and where are you? Like, where do you see yourself going with this? Like you talk about like you talking to the younger guys and having these different relationships, but where do you see yourself? What do you want to do with your career?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm nearing the end of my career. So
really?
I mean, I'm 46, so I could retire in 4 years, and I'm kind of in that waiting zone. You know, I see our department that we work for making strides in the right direction, but is it enough? Because the state of California is the big problem, right? We can make all the strides we want as a department, but ultimately, if the whole state's jacked up and our county's jacked up, it doesn't matter what our city does. But I do want to kind of see where all that goes, to make my decision. I do know that I want to leave at a better place than I was there. I know a lot of people don't believe in that type of stuff, but like me, my fiance's son is applying for the department that we work for,
All right.
and because I saw the message come out, I'm like, hey, if you know somebody, like people don't want to be police officers and I get that part of it, but at the same time, that's the reason why I wanted to do that. I like being FTO. Everyone talks about me being in the game field. I'm gonna be honest, me being FTO was 10 times better than me being in the game.
Really?
I loved being in the game. It is what I loved. I had goals to be a homicide and all these things, but field training was more important to me, and making sure that the future. And it sounds weird, it sounds corny, but I felt if I had an impact on the younger officers for the future of the department, that was bigger than being in the gang unit.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
And I still to that today, I take the younger officers along, and I have a talk with them, and I try to guide them in the right direction. Just because times are changing and they got to change with it, and I feel that if I can impact the younger officers, that's probably my biggest goal. So I want to do a little bit of that before I call it quits. But my fiance and I talk about it. We have dreams of. It's like I've never spent so much on an app on Zillow than my entire life. I look at like homes in like other parts of the country, and I'm like dreaming of like farmhouses in Tennessee and hunting properties in Texas, and I'm like, babe, wouldn't this be so great? I could just sit there and shoot shit and stuff like that. And so eventually, I want to do that stuff eventually, but I do have offers to go work for the security company that I used to work for and manage Coachella, Stagecoach, EDC, things like that, which I've done.
Oh, that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I don't know if I told you about this, but my collateral appointment, I run the stages I used to. I haven't done it in a couple of years, but I ran the stages for a few years at Coachella and Stagecoach.
All right.
Yeah, all the stages, like 7 stages. So I ran them all, a couple hundred people, managed them. And that's kind of my expertise outside of work. Is I'm an expert in crowd management as far as festivals are concerned, and that's something that I could do when I retire. And I plan on kind of doing when I retire, but I'm not sure if I want to completely dive into that yet. So.
That's pretty cool though. So if you ever kicked out of Stagecoach, it was PJ's fault.
That's true, and there's been a few.
Yeah.
There's been a few on our department that have been kicked out. I get that phone call because they all know that I work it, so they're like, "Oh, PJ." I show up, I'm like, "Oh."
That's so good.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing that? You said before you were a police officer?
Yeah. So I did that right out of high school. So I've been doing that since '94.
Wow.
Yeah, on and off since '94, and it didn't stop when I became a police officer. He always calls me, and my best friends, the general manager. I told him, okay. So every year during the collateral employment time, I'm always filling out the information and put their information. I'm like, okay, just give me a call whenever. Yeah. So, but I haven't done it lately, especially since I promoted it. I'm like, I don't really need to do that. So
I'm gonna have to ask you for a job.
Yeah, maybe we'll see. But that's my goal in the future, and I want to just go watch my daughter and play college softball and help her through college. She's planning on majoring in forensic science, so she's going to try to get into the field that way.
All right.
So that's kind of cool. So.
What did she want to do, like CSI?
CSI type stuff.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you talk to them, you're like, we're going over majors and the things they do. She's like, what does this one do? I'm like, oh, that's like CSI. And she goes, like the movie? And I'm like, yeah, just like the movie. She's like, oh, I want to do that. I'm like, okay. It's like talking to teenagers nowadays.
There's no reality. Like, take her out and be like, this is what it really looks like.
Yeah, it's kind of like that, but not really. Yeah.
Well, it's like we talked about it today in squad. It's like the person that comes in and says, I want to be a detective. Like they haven't applied yet to the police department. They want to be a detective.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, let's just one step at a time.
Yeah, or SWAT. I want to do SWAT. It's like, oh, okay. Like right away, huh? That's a good idea.
Let's see
but you bring that up, and I went to supervisor school, and we talked about like the generations now. When we started, we felt if we put in for things younger, we felt that it was almost disrespectful to the position if we put in like so early. And these freaking young fuckers, They literally like year and a half on. It's like, when can I become a sergeant? It's like, whoa,
yeah.
chill out, bro.
Oh, no, yeah. I have guys that are young. One guy says like, I want to be a commander here. I'm like, all right. And like, I know guys, but the guys who apply, they'll apply for like different positions. Like you said, you did different field teams, and you're on the game team, and they apply when they're really young, and they don't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so that's one time you didn't get a job. Like you just started, and I'm like, I applied for several jobs I didn't get. Like, and it took me several years to get anywhere in the department. So it's like, yeah, it's very possible. You may be in patrol for several years.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and a lot of people want to do it. Don't want to do other things.
Yeah.
But honestly, like doing patrol now, like I don't think there's a job out there that I look at. Even as a sergeant, I'm looking at a job that I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. Like I enjoy patrol. Like I enjoy the people I work around, and having those relationships. Because let's see, you go in. I mean, the gang field team has its own dynamics. Obviously, like you guys are close knit. But when you go into any of these detective bureaus, like you're behind your desk.
Yeah.
You're not. I mean,
You're
no
not
offense to
even,
anyone that's a detective.
I'm gonna be honest. When you get up there, it's like you're not even a cop anymore. You're pushing paper. You don't even know. Like some of them come out of the detectives and they're like, whoa, there's a culture shock from.
Oh yeah.
And that's why it happens like that.
You
There's a
forget
reason.
what it's like. Yeah.
You totally forget. And I don't want to discourage any young officers because there was recently some officers, you do evaluations on them, talk about their future and stuff like that. And I told them, no, you should apply for these positions because you do have to go through the process of going to an interview. Like, no, I've never done that before. So at least go through it, like even in like try to go through the interview process so you know how to talk to people.
Well, it's an interview. It's like you don't even know. So I don't think I really. I'm gonna say I didn't interview well until my sergeant interview.
Yeah.
And I maybe one before that, but like I remember the interview process. Someone's like, "Hey, you need to do this way," and I'm like, "How come no one has told me that?" I've always been more like answer short. Like don't answer. Really expand. And now I don't know about you, but I'm in there for 30, 40 minutes.
And that's what I tell them. I tell them you need to make them stop you when you're in an interview. Like, okay, like we could go on now. Yeah. It's like if they give you 10 to 15 minutes for something, you should take 20. It's like one of those things. You should just keep diarrhea of the mouth, just keep talking, and you could talk about that for like any subject that's brought up. And I figured that out later on in my career. It probably took me like 20 years to figure that out.
That's funny. There's a couple that I would do is I would drive. I used to have a long commute. I'm telling you something long commute, but I would ask myself the same few questions in the car and just talk out loud and record it. I recorded on my phone while I was driving and just talk to basically say it like as if someone asked me a question, and then I would literally answer a question. It would be like 20 minutes. I mean, that wouldn't be the exact question they asked, but I could take parts of that answer and apply it to any of the questions, and I was able to really answer really anything.
No, yeah. And there's so many, like you mentioned being in patrol versus going to the detective bureau. There's so many openings in all these other spots, but ultimately I like it. I like it's weird. I like being out in the field. I like seeing the officers meet the public. I still like it. It hasn't turned me off with a bit. There are political things that are going on in this world that are against us out being in patrol.
Right.
But at the same time, it's kind of like interesting to like weave your way around those issues as well.
I think the biggest problem for me isn't I think I said earlier on if you listen to the episodes, I talk about the fact that like doing the job, it's not I have no issue doing the job. The actual dealing with the public, making arrests, hanging on calls for service, all that stuff. But it is the political climate. So we're talking about this right now, like taking someone to jail right now, and then they're out the next day. When you're like, we have a legit crime here, violent crime or whatever it is, and now they're back on the street. And I think the frustration comes with it, like, okay, they're not going to back you politically to do your job, and this guy is out in the street after he just did something heinous. You're like, I don't understand that imbalance.
And then officers kind of put their back to the wall, right? It makes them feel like, oh well, then I'm not going to do it if they do that. And that's what I'm trying to implore to everyone is you can't have that type of attitude. Just go about your business how you normally would go about your business, and then you let the courts kind of decide on what's going on. I understand they may be out by the time you finish writing your report, hitting save on your report, they're already out in the streets.
Right.
I get that part of it, but don't let that. We still have a duty to the citizens that we work for in our county or in our city.
Right.
I still believe in that. I still believe that like they, you go to calls nowadays, they're like, well, what's the crime? Everyone always asks that, what's the crime? It's like, dude is walking around in the middle of the street with a knife. I don't care what the crime is. Don't you think that the citizens of whatever city we're in wants us to stop this guy?
You're like the guy you tackled the other day?
Yeah, we had that discussion, and I was like, guys, I get it. We want to have a good crime for things, but at the same time, if you were driving down the street and a person was waving a knife, whether or not there was a crime or not, wouldn't you, if you lived in that city, wouldn't you want your police officers or sheriffs or whoever they are to do something about it?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
so that's what I tell them. I'm like, they're like, yeah, I would. I was like, well, what's the difference between you wanting it done in your city versus you doing it for your job?
Yeah, and I think that there is a disconnect because a couple of things. A lot of people can't afford to live in this city, right? So they don't live in LA County. They're out of the city, so it's not, you don't have that ownership. You have ownership of your job. Like obviously you want to do a good job, but you don't have the ownership of it's your city. Versus like if it's your house and something happens outside your house, whether you're at work or not, you're gonna handle it. Like you're gonna take care of business, right? Because it's your house, right? You can get the guy off your property or whatever. So I think there's that. And the other thing is I've noticed
with that, do you think that would change if like any city that you're in had programs to have their officers like you remember they used to have the home officers next door program where they lived in the city that they worked in.
And they got like some type of benefit.
Don't you think that would kind of bring some kind of pride of citizenship in the cities? I mean, me personally.
I mean, it's so expensive to live here. I mean, I know we get paid well, but it's so expensive to live in the city. But if there was a program to I don't know how it would be, like if it was a mortgage program or something, I'm sure officers would take advantage of it, and I'm sure that there would be an ownership of like, hey, this is my city, and because your neighbors, like I lived in the city for a while, and my neighbor would call me, like, hey, there's this guy doing this, and I would give him suggestions, or like, hey, yeah, you need to call, like, police aren't going to do anything because I know, or hey, you need to handle it yourself, or hey, you need to call the police, depending on the situation. But he liked having that contact, and I'm sure neighbors would love to have that contact of like, hey, what's going on in your neighborhood, and how can I handle it? But yeah, I don't know if any cities do that. If you wanna, you can message me if you have a city that.
No, but you're absolutely right. Most of the officers that work in any department, they don't usually live in the city that they're in because of the costs and things like that. But you do have to have a pride of you do have to think about like, in the end, these are the citizens of whatever city you're in, and they're going to expect some kind of service from you. And I see officers all the time. I don't want to respond to that call. Well, then who is going to respond to that call? Who do they call? They're still going to call somebody. I mean, somebody has to go out and handle that call.
It was funny. I said this the other day. I said there's two things that you're hired to do. You're hired to answer calls for service and take police reports. There's only two things you're technically hired to do. The two things that police officers hate most: answering calls for service and taking police reports. I'm like, that's what your job is. Like, oh, hey, what do you want me to do on this? I'm like, take a report. Like, it's not, anyway. So one thing I wanted to say was that there was recently there was something that happened that I was like, you know what? I've noticed because of the political climate, it's causing officers to take a step back and not do proactive police work. Which we understand, and you understand there's a liability of trying to be proactive, and then if something happens, who's are they back liability? But there are times where police, I think this is now trickling down to calls for service, where you go to a call, like you said, you're like, well, I don't want to take a report, or I don't want to do this. It's not a real crime, or whatever it is, and they don't take the action that they should be taking, and they're cutting corners. And I think that we need to really be wary of, like, if you see your partner or you see someone else that's cutting corners, to make sure that we're not cutting corners on anything, because that's also a liability, and you're going to end up getting yourself in trouble and not doing service to the community. To make sure we're handling the call, completely.
And that's why I think if you go into the with the right mind frame of helping the person that you're there for, you're not going to get in that. If you have the idea of being pissed off or mad because of whatever situation, worried about liability and this type of things, if you're going to worry about those things, then you are going to get in trouble. You're going to get hurt, number one, because you're not going to do it physically the way you should be doing it. Or number two, you're getting in trouble because you're not going to take the report or whatever. So I think if you go in there with the idea of trying to help, be safe about doing it, but going in there to help somebody, and then, at the end of the day, sometimes they just want that report number.
I know.
And that would
think about it. So recently my grandfather's house got broken into, and I know what it means. Like he lived in the middle of nowhere. His house got broken into, and no one was home. And now the police came, and then they left, and then now the lab's gonna come out and take fingerprints. Okay, let's be honest. They're never gonna catch these people. It's middle of the night. They're not gonna catch them. That's what I honestly believe that they're not gonna catch them. Maybe by luck, there's fingerprints somewhere, and they catch them one day, and they connect them to some other kind of burglary. But the thing is, though, when my dad shows me the report number or the form, and I don't see a report number on there, I tell him, hey, look, I don't work for this agency, but I'm like, hey, I don't see a report number. Like, that's not a report number, that's a call number. I know the difference, but you need to make sure we get a report. Actual report is taken. Come to find out, they do pull report numbers at the station later on. No, they didn't ADV. They pull report numbers at the station later on once they get in the computer system. It's just different than the way we do it, right? But I didn't know that, but I'm gonna make sure that we get whatever we need, because, my dad wants to know that, hey, something's being done and there's a report being taken.
Not only that, the statistical part of it within the city.
Oh,
Whatever city you're in, the reporting district that you're in, or whatever it is, that's basically what any department, sheriffs or anything, that's what they go based upon is that's going to get you more policing in that area. That's going to get you more services in your area, things like that. So when you advise off of it, it's like, okay, it's like it never happened. That call never happened. That robbery, that burglary never happened.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah, I know. I think all of that's crazy. I just think that I still feel this is really important. If the leadership starts to take care of, and I mean leadership being like political, it doesn't matter, but even like your direct supervisor, if we're taking care of each other, however we can, in your way of making sure that your people are taken care of, and you enforce this idea of doing a good job, like you want to do a good job, you're taking care of them in the field, you're doing all your reports and managing them the way that you feel is right, then they're going to want to do a good job, and eventually it's going to trickle down to the people who are being face to face with the community, and they're going to want to treat people with respect and do a good job. I think if we treat people disrespectfully, like if I treat you terribly and you work for me, and then I send you out into the field, what are you going to do? Like are you going to be you're going to have a chip on your shoulder, go out and say, oh, no one cares about what I'm doing, he or whatever, he treats me like crap, and then you're going to go treat another person like crap, and it's like the whole shit rolls downhill, right? Like, we need to take care of each other. I think it all kind of comes back to that, but I don't know, a lot of things need to be changed, right?
And granted, it's tough for any department or to make those type of changes for it, especially with everything that's going on. You can only do so much. They have people to answer to, and I get that part of it, but at the same time, I think on our level, we have our subordinates that work for us, officers that work for us. I think that we could take care of our members and kind of guide them in the right direction, and hopefully that is enough for at least that part of our city, right? For that time frame, that watch, that city, while I'm there, I could try to make that difference, and hopefully that's enough. That's all I have control over. That's all you have control over at the end of the day. So yeah.
All right. Well, this is good.
This was.
You enjoyed it?
Dude, I like it. I like your setup here.
You want to come back on sometime?
Definitely. We'll figure something out.
Talk about something. Yeah. So
we can talk about some stuff that happened.
So I do want to ask before we close this out. All right. So going back to, I know you talked a little bit, but going back to your situation with your daughter and you put everything to work. So I know you said you wish you did it differently or you could have done it differently. So if someone's going through something at home and they find themselves in this position where they're now putting everything into work, how and what do you think you could offer, like you could do, or to provide some type of advice to them?
Yeah. Number one, I would say I think that if I would have found some kind of counseling, I think that would have helped. I would have had some form of sit down like we are, sit on a couch, lay down, however you want to say it. I think that would have helped me. I didn't have that, and I think it was my bravado of me being, I don't want to do that, or say something wrong. I don't want to sit there and say that there's something wrong with me at the time, but I think that I could have used that. Ultimately, for me, it was my friends, my personal friends, and my now fiance that pulled me out of that type of thing, and my own daughter. At the end of the day, it was like, do I want to hurt myself, or do I want to do something bad and go down this slippery slope down into like being crap? and I still had to be strong for my daughter. Ultimately, looking her in the face and being a strong role model for her was a big part of that. Like I would come home and I'd be like, I got to be strong for her. I gotta pull myself out of that. And not everyone's gonna be able to do kind of what I did on my own. And that's what I fear is that with like Chris or with Good or DC and stuff like that, that we could have. If they would have had that kind of outlet, I don't know if they were strong enough to kind of do it the way I was. At a certain point in my life, I don't think I was strong enough to even get through that. I needed that help, and luckily there were people in my life that helped me with that. You know, so I would suggest trying to as people, listeners, and you and myself is try to be that person for somebody else, and if you are going through those type of problems, don't be scared to reach out to friends, reach out to supervisors, reach out to family members, reach out to counseling, whatever you could do. And like I told you before, the department did a great job of reacting once it happened, right. but they didn't really do anything in that time in between, you know. And is that their fault? I don't know if it's 100% their fault. I take partial blame on that because I didn't do anything as well. Like I didn't personally try to reach out, but I don't remember any kind of sort of resources for me to go through except for Dr. Klein, right. You know, or something like that, or any kind of shrink that it has to do with any kind of department. Right. You know, I just don't know if that. But now I'm starting to see that, unfortunately, these steps, these bad situations that happened on our department and other departments. Now the departments are starting to react to it and offer those things. And I didn't have those going on, but I would say that any officers that are there to use those programs now that are in place, definitely 100%. So.
Well, I appreciate that, and I really do. I appreciate you coming on, and I want to do this again. Yeah. We'll figure out something else to talk about. I'm sure we can talk about a lot of stuff, whatever.
Yeah. Just think of we'll when I get closer to retirement, we could talk about some of the cool things that I did when I was in these other units. That's for another time.
All right. That's good. By the way, I was told this already before you came on, but they said you have a great voice for radio. So everyone that's listening is going to be really happy that you're on.
They're going to think like I'm like some deep voice.
They're going to want me to be replaced.
Yeah. No, I love this little setup. That was great.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
My buddy set that as the same setup, so we used it on episode 2, and then it's kind of cool. Get a different sound.
I like it.
Stuff.
All right,
we're gonna close it out. For those of you who are watching, we're gonna put this on YouTube, and then for listening on obviously on Apple or Spotify.
Cheers to the whiskey.
Oh yeah.
We're grabbing
our cup together. Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
And then if we talked about reaching out, so if you are interested in, I created those business cards, which are the Let's Grab a Cup business cards, and on the back, it's basically, I don't have one with me right in front of me right now, but basically on the back, it says that you trust the person that you're handing that card to, and that you're asking them to trust you, and you're willing to hold space for them and take time to listen to them, have these conversations, wherever it may go. You know, like I didn't know, I knew some of PJ's story today, but I really didn't know where it was going to go, and I really just enjoyed kind of diving in and like kind of exploring that and giving you this opportunity and giving other people this opportunity. So if you want to get those cards, you can get the PDF off of my website, which is sturgeonwellness.com. You can find all the links to the episodes there, as far as YouTube and the podcast links. And yeah, anything coaching related, look at my website. You can find me at AP_Sturgeon and at Let's Grab a Cup on Instagram. Anything you want to plug for your stuff going forward? You want to get somebody to hire you for Coachella, or?
No, I got that all set up. Don't hit me up for tickets though.
If you want a job working for Coachella or something.
Definitely after I retire, I will be hiring a lot of police officers to help me out. So
I'll be looking.
Yeah, definitely.
All right.
All right, man.
Cheers.
Cheers. Dude, that was good. Right there, dude. Right, like I read it in about an hour too.
That's pretty good.
Sweet. That was fun, man.
I wasn't sure how long we're gonna talk, and then more. That's not matter.
That was good. Hopefully people.